So we're going to start off with our first pillar, which is community. And I think one of the benefits originally of kind of living in densely populated places, in theory, was that you were going to feel like you're a sense of a community already. But the fact of the matter is urban hubs and city centers have become so dense that we actually don't know our neighbors at all. So prior to the pandemic, 73% of people in the UK didn't know their neighbors' names. Hopefully you know some of your neighbors now. But what the pandemic has done is really forced us to look around us and notice what matters and really highlight this importance of community. So we've seen a rise of informal volunteering, kind of helping out with a neighbor's kid or picking up some grocery shopping. It's up to 33% now of people who do that once a month. That doesn't sound like a very high number, but that's the highest that's ever been recorded by the UK government. So when we think about this from a cultural context, you know, you can't build a community out of nothing. So Faye Bound Alberti says, to truly belong to a group or a place requires more than a shared interest. It demands a sense of obligation and commitment, something both emotional and practical. So what the pandemic has delivered on a positive benefit is the sense of shared obligation to a community and a realization of its benefits. So we have this study, the stat here from Spotify, that 62% of people want to rebuild society, and they want to do it through community, and what's more, they want the help of brands, developers, and local authorities to rebuild it together. So when we think about this from that consumer context, it means that consumers expect the future of town centers to enhance their sense of community. They need spaces and places that really help them build true connections to the area and are really responsive to their local needs. So we're going to talk about two microtrends that we're kind of seeing in this area. So one is micro-local, which is looking at how retailers can kind of shrink their footprint, be a bit more hyper-local, and embed themselves into the community. And the other is a community supply chain, which is really focusing on self-sufficiency and kind of bringing production closer to the community. So the first one we're going to take a look at is micro-local. So here, as I said, you know, consumers kind of expect their services and products to be more available in their local vicinity. So 65% of UK shoppers kind of had a greater appreciation for their local shops during COVID. So what we're seeing now is a lot of these larger format stores kind of shrinking their footprint, going micro-local, going hyper-local, so they can more embed themselves within that community. So throughout the presentation, we're going to show you some businesses that are leading the way. And the case studies we have here, so there's 3 of them. And these kind of act as signals of how this can be done. So the first is Homebase and Next. So Homebase has partnered with Next to kind of open mini garden centers in their stores, and it allows them to kind of have a smaller footprint and be in places that they might not have been, and it's a bit more personal than being in a big retail park. The other example we have here is IKEA. So IKEA has committed to opening up 40 smaller format stores across the globe. And they're opening up, the first one that they opened up was in Queens in New York. And what's interesting is not just the fact that they're reducing their footprint, but they're also kind of catering to the local needs of the community. So this Queens store kind of features, all the rooms are set up for smaller spaces because people obviously have less space in kind of New York City. And they also have a lot of product ranges that can just be taken out on the day because a lot of people don't necessarily own cars. The last example that we have here is Nike Unite. So Nike really is a brand that's kind of has been focused on direct-to-consumer retail, and they have a lot of first-party data that helps them do that, and it helps them be a lot more hyper-local. So they've opened up a format called Nike Unite, and they use all that first-party data to understand what sports are the people in the area interested. They stock that product to kind of cater to that need, but they're also hiring people from the local area and committing to training them. They offer sports coaching training so that people who work at the store can also be sports coaches for the community. And they talk about the store really existing to serve and celebrate the people in each local community.
Okay, so for each of the examples that Daniela introduces, we're going to think about how this may fit in a UK town centre context. So starting with the micro-local, thinking about how these brands need to integrate themselves in the community, perhaps they should be in the community space in the first place, not in a regular retail unit, but actually out there visible. And what we have here, what we've imagined here, is an existing outdoor area that exists in pretty much every town centre. It's either a car park or a back house service area that is underused and doesn't really serve the community. And we're thinking about how we can drive commercial value out of it as well as treat it as public amenity. So if we take the Homebase example, which is traditionally a garden center in out-of-town places, and now going into Next, and think about what that could be in the future. Well, you could have a car park which is curated as a garden center where people would go to buy plants in their locality, but that could be curated as a park or a garden. So it's actually a place where people can go and linger and enjoy themselves and take away some of the plants with them. But part of that could also have wild planting as well, so contributing to the kind of biodiversity factor of the cities. And in this landscape, you could have other brands building their own bespoke pavilions. So for example, if you take the IKEA example, targeting the local community, that could be a folly in this landscape that is perhaps has a workshop or some sort of tool borrowing station. So it really targets very specifically what people need and what they want in that area. And similarly, if we take the Nike example, again, building a bespoke pavilion that perhaps is focused around a specific sport, so maybe has a bit of a basketball pitch. And all of this serves as both an amenity and a public space that people can go and discover, and as commercial entity. This is also what we see when people think about the new anchors being public spaces instead of, say, department stores or one specific store. This kind of entity where you'd come for the space, and on the side of that, you might actually end up buying something.
So Daniela mentioned this idea of building from the ground up, and the expectation that developers and local authorities have to be involved in this. But landlords, of course, have a huge part to play in this as well. So this idea or trend of micro-local community has seen brands, services, retailers really embedding themselves in the communities that they exist within. And this really means that strong tenant engagement is vital for landlords going forwards to easily understand the community needs. It's, of course, in the interest of the landlord to understand fully what the community demands and to listen to local stakeholders. And this enables them to select brands already aligned with existing community needs to fill vacant spaces. And then also to educate these brands on how to really successfully launch within the context of that specific local community. So this is an opportunity for landlords to help build the spaces and places that their local community want, and to sort of revive them and then to maintain these busy, thriving city or town centres post-COVID. So how can we promote and secure this as landlords? At Grosvenor, we have made a commitment to selectively invest in tenants with either new business ideas or diversification strategies by way of our tenant investment fund. And investing in tenants and in businesses post-pandemic at a time where we have seen and are seeing a lot of uncertainty in the market shows a real confident approach to the future of our city and town centres, building from the ground up. Throughout this process, ensuring that a lot of time and care is really invested in building that sort of landlord and tenant relationship does make sure that the best selections are made that work for sort of mutual success and the community benefiting from that. So working with local stakeholders to enhance the environment where our occupiers and our community are spending time or lingering in this sort of urban garden that we can see here on the screen is really important. And we're going to just touch on an example. So during the pandemic, we saw North Audley Street in Mayfair in central London transform. And this was through landlord as well as local council, tenants and the community itself really working together to facilitate this further outdoor seating at a time when indoor seating was prohibited. And so this involved sort of a restriction on vehicles. We can see that the pavements were widened to facilitate extra seating, and these green features sort of made this network or urban garden. And then within that, the local businesses actually created this sort of network, and we did see that the footfall on this particular street was significantly higher than comparative streets in the area, and it's very difficult to prove sort of biodiversity enhancement, but I do think that the green features was something that really made people feel like they were in a much cleaner and happier, more positive environment. I am now going to pass back to Daniela.
So the second trend that we have within the pillar community is this idea of community supply chain. So another thing that's happened in the last 2 years is our sense of proximity has really kind of changed. So our world, our communities have shrunk down to our neighborhoods, and we realized we need to have a lot more resources available locally. So for instance, the next door app during the first month of the pandemic for us, I suppose that lockdown March 2020, it spiked 80% as people were kind of seeking out their neighbors to kind of get those shared amenities. So what's resulting now is this kind of community supply chain mindset where people are kind of wanting to keep resources local and keeping funds moving also within the community. So it's about helping local businesses and local people alike. In terms of kind of who is leading the way with the community supply chain, firstly we have this app here called Local Node. So this is based in Sweden. And what it does is it connects local food producers with consumers, and they can kind of order from multiple different food producers, and then there are these nodes, these physical meetup points where they can then meet and then get all of their different kind of foods they've chosen in this physical space. Another example we have here is a lot me. So this is kind of like the Airbnb for vegetable patch. So if you have some room to spare in your garden and people want to grow kind of fruits and veg, there can be an exchange that happens there. And what's interesting is that we have seen people attempt to do this in the past, but the need wasn't there so much. So those kind of other versions didn't really work out. Whereas now, we've seen allotment wait lists up to 1,000 people, and I think 2/3 of allotments in the UK have a wait list of between 100 and 400 people. So here it's about how do we provide spaces, shared spaces that can be a resource for the community. The last example that we have here is Peddler, and so this is another app. And what this does is it kind of encourages people to participate in the community and shop locally. So you kind of go on the app and indicate what you want to buy, and the more people indicate they want to buy that thing, you get a reduction on the price, so it goes up to 55% discount. So really kind of tapping into the thinking of the benefits of being a part of the community and keeping your money within the local community.
So, what does a space that caters to the local supply chain look like? Well, if we start with the examples that Daniela looked at, so the local node and the fact that you're now collecting your produce from a local producer, what could be a great elevated experience is if instead of just collecting at some sort of a fulfillment hub, you actually had the opportunity to meet those producers and talk to them about what is it they do and how they go about producing the food that you're buying. So we've taken an example of an already existing community space, a church that has been repurposed to serve as this fulfillment hub and also as a showcase for small independent producers from the local community that would not be able to afford a full-on shopping unit on a high street or in a shopping mall. So what we imagine here is the people coming to collect their groceries from the local node can actually stay on and linger, and there's perhaps a bit of a performance program, and there are other producers and manufacturers and local businesses represented that you can discover as you come into this community space. So it's a repurposed building which serves different parts of the community and different functions at different times of the day. It does not only have to represent food producers, it could be representing local makers and artists and craftspeople, as we've sort of illustrated here in the upper gallery. And the brands and the apps like Peddler and AllotMe could also be taking up space here, because sooner or later digital communities and digital movements need to proliferate in the physical world. So, for example, Peddler could have its most popular products of the week displayed in this place, changing every week. So people who do not want to use the app but still want to get the benefit of the local spending can still come here and use it. And equally, the churchyard is now turned into a series of allotments which are given over to AllotMe to manage. So people who want to grow their own vegetables can come here and use this without having to have their own patch of land. So what this does really is it gives a physical presence to the local community, and it also helps keep that local spending and keep the resources within the community.
So where is the landlord's part to play here? To harbour this connection between local business and local users, which is clearly key for consumers, means our spaces need to transform to accommodate new businesses in one space, but also varying preferences, which, as we've seen, can change continuously. Understanding and building relationships with key stakeholders has really shown its value, as well as investing into the transformation and repurposing of existing spaces. We've seen that really considered delegation to an appropriate and well-selected operator or manager that really understands or knows a particular community can be really effective. We're going to touch on an example here of Mercato Mayfair. So this is the real-life reusing of a redundant church space, transformed into this sort of hyper-local grocery store with pop-up style restaurants, or perhaps this sort of concept of a fulfillment hub. This is truly an old space given a new lease of life through local business, local community, and local connections. Mercato itself was selected especially as the operator for this, chiefly because they were already invested and embedded within the community. But what the landlord's been able to do and provide is an incredibly flexible model for this operator to make changes and to adapt to consumer demand where appropriate. So, for example, now in the basement, the space is being used as a sort of community hall, village hall type space that can be rented out for various different events. And this ground floor area lends itself to this idea of exhibiting brands, businesses, or artists' work, as we saw in Grigor's future community supply chain space. So there have been opportunities throughout the pandemic for landlords to respond to the demands of the community and really build links and networks. And post-pandemic, this is going to be vital to maintain and cement these. And just briefly before we move on, Daniela mentioned the demand for allotments, which has rocketed. But perhaps the waiting lists need to start transferring elsewhere. We've seen so much disused space in town and centres that could and should have been utilised. And making these initiatives happen is about the community working with landlords and councils to facilitate this. So in Sweden, at our shopping centres during the COVID pandemic, we saw a lot of new allotments springing up. And actually, these proved so popular, but there was so much community engagement that came from these that it actually drove people back in to start using the facilities again and to shop in the shops. And it's really a sign that integrating these new trends into our existing spaces is effective. And of course, a perfect opportunity for landlords to take advantage of these digital apps like AllotMe. Really like epitomizing a full community supply chain.